So I've been watching Glenn Fricker's latest series, 13 Things to Avoid, and I noticed this comment regarding DI boxes.
However, the one thing I've always recommended to guitar players is purchasing a good direct box. A Countryman Type 48 will set you back a whopping $152 at Sweetwater and last you a lifetime.
So I've got two DI boxes here. I've got Behringer Ultra DI DI20, which is actually two DI boxes in one. And I've also got the 2 Notes Torpedo Reload. So although this isn't a DI box in itself, it does have a high impedance input which does act as a DI box. So considering the huge price difference between the Countryman DI, which is $150, and this Behringer Ultra DI, which is $20 for 2 DI boxes, I'm wondering what's going to be the huge difference in sound. So the only way I can really do this is by testing this Behringer against the 2 Notes Torpedo Reload, which is obviously a more high quality unit and has a much higher purchase price. So the way I tested this is I had a Gibson Les Paul 1960 stock and a Squier Classic Vibe bass, again completely stock, going into a Fender ABY pedal, and then we have 2 identical Hesu cables going to the Torpedo Reload and the Behringer DI. After that I have 2 identical XLR cables going into channels 3 and 4 in my interface, and the interface is a US 1800 by Tascam. So in Pro Tools I've recorded 2 channels, I've added the exact same processing on both of them, and the only thing I've done is I have a trim pot on DI2 just to reduce the level coming from that. So now the method's out of the way, let's have a listen to the results. I've color coded these results, DI1 being blue and DI2 being yellow. I won't tell you which is which until after. So my first impressions are there isn't really much of an audible difference between the two. So other than the level being higher from DI2 compared to DI1, there really doesn't seem to be any difference between these two signals. So I'm just going to perform 2 more tests to see if we can see or hear any more differences. So the first test I'm going to do is a null test. So I'm going to take this bass channel and I've disabled all the amps in plugins, and all I'm going to do is take DI2 and I'm going to invert it against DI1. So if there is a huge difference, there should be not really much of a difference when I click the phase invert button. However, if I invert the phase and there's a huge signal drop or the signals completely cancel out, then the 2 signals originally were identical. So let's have a listen. So now we've inverted phase. So as you can hear, there is an audible level drop between these 2 signals. So I'm just going to pull up an EQ on the master fader and let's just have a look if we can see any kind of differences here. So this is with the phase inverted, and I'm going to undo the phase. So according to this meter, that's about a -12 reduction in dB. So the signals are very similar, hence why we've got so much cancellation going on. It doesn't mean they're identical, but they are very similar. So another test I can perform just to have a look to see if there is any other differences in terms of the frequency spectrum is I've pulled up an EQ on this DI2 signal. So on this EQ, I've set a sidechain input to DI1. So there'll be a red line which will represent DI1, and then be a blue line which represents DI2. Let's again have a listen to see if there's any differences. So after we've listened to it for a little bit, I'm going to turn the sidechain on and off just so we can see that it is actually there and it is actually doing something. So as we can see from this test, there really isn't any audible or even visual difference that we can make using these meters or using this frequency spectrum. So given the two differences in the DI boxes, going from a mix perspective, you're not going to get too much of a difference between a £20 DI box and a £500 unit, which has quite a high-end DI box on board. So the last thing to mention with both of these is how much noise we get from each of them. So I've recorded a track, again the same method as before, and I've got exactly the same amp sim on, and all we're going to do is make sure that the gate is turned off all the way on both of these, and we're just going to compare now the noise that we get in between each of these riffs. Now DI2. I'll go back and forth between DI1 and 2 on this last bit here. So DI1. So as we can hear, DI1 has a lot more noise than DI2 does. So DI1 was the Behringer Ultra DI, and DI2 was the Torpedo Reload. Now, as we can see audibly in a mix, there's not much difference. However, you do get more noise on the Behringer unit than you do on the Torpedo Reload. It's also worth mentioning that Behringer is powered by battery, and the Torpedo Reload is powered by the mains. I could have used phantom power to power the Behringer. However, I decided to keep the test fair. I would use each unit's own internal power to see what the difference is in terms of noise. With that being said, we're just going to turn a noise gate on and see if using the noisy Behringer DI track, we can still get a usable DI with a guitar track which has lots of stops and starts in. So as we can see, all the noise is gone, and if we went in and tidied it up, we can probably get it even tighter. There is no muting on the guitar other than the palm mutant, so there's no foam, there's no J-clips, there's nothing to kind of stop any overtones. However, with a noise gate, we can still get rid of most of the bleed from the DI track. So as a pilot, it's really interesting to see how these two DIs stack up against each other. It's interesting to see that the £20 DI signal from the Behringer is audibly nearly identical to the more expensive unit, the Torpedo Reload. So with this in mind, it would be really interesting to see what difference it makes if we compared the Behringer to another high-end Soul DI unit, so a unit which isn't kind of a 3-in-1 like the Torpedo Reload. So just a disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with any of these products. This is not a review or any kind of advertisement. I'm just interested to see what the difference is between two different DI boxes at two different price points. I think for a lot of people getting into audio recording, it's really important to know what products are going to make the biggest difference to our sound. So based on this test, other than a bit more noise, you won't find too much of a difference in your guitar tone using a cheaper DI box. Now, I would be interested to see how this translates to comparisons against much more high-end units. However, I don't have any, so I'll leave that up to you guys watching this to do that test.